This morning, well, as I said, the Prime Minister was asked for his own views on the protests.
I saw a good meme on the weekend. Martin Luther King, didn't change anything by burning anything down and looting any shops. And I just think to myself, how wonderful a country is Australia. We have our problems, we have our faults, we have our issues. There's no doubt about that. But when I see things like that, I'm just very thankful.
Australia's own record is now under fresh scrutiny as expressions of solidarity flow from the families of Indigenous people who died in custody to protesters in America. Much has been made of the overrepresentation of African Americans in US prisons. Look at this. In America, black people make up 14% of the general population, but 34% of the prison population. Now look at this. In Australia, the proportion of Indigenous people in prison is even higher. Indigenous Australians are just 3% of the general population, but over 27% of those in prison, making them the most incarcerated people on earth per capita, on a per capita basis. Wes, can I just turn to you on that? I mean, over the weekend there's been a lot of angsting in Australia about how lucky we are and how terrible it is in the US. And that's been met with a forthright response from Indigenous Australians. Basically, are you kidding? 432 deaths in custody, Indigenous deaths in custody since 1991. So why does it seem to so many people, including perhaps the Prime Minister, that what we have here is not like that?
Well, I think in Australia, if you're Indigenous, you're likely to be incarcerated at 13 times a higher rate than non-Indigenous prison population. So when you think about the number of incidents that happen back with the police, with a patrol car, with police on a beat, there are so many instances where it can go wrong really quickly. It is an enormous problem for young Indigenous kids that,
and do you think that's,
really worry.
That's recognised in Australia? I mean, do you think that is well recognised?
No, I don't. Well, certainly it is for me and people that I talk to in my network. We are concerned, but this is enduring. The Royal Commission in the 90s, very few recommendations got accepted. There was a great Four Corners show last year around the juvenile justice system and watch houses here in Queensland. This is an ongoing thing. However, in America, what we're seeing and sort of what grabs the attention is mobile phone footage around police interaction. In Australia, by comparison, a lot of it happens in a prison, in a watch house. It doesn't make its way out into social media by video.
Okay.
So we then sit back and wait, sometimes years, for a coronial inquiry, for some sort of inquest. So it's very, very difficult to sort of understand what actually happened. And even when police footage from a watch house is released, it's so rare that we actually get to see or to form any opinion about what may or may not be the real story.
Well, let me bring another voice into this conversation. For more, we're joined in Sydney by Keenan Mundine, co-founder at Deadly Connections Community and Justice Services, an Aboriginal-controlled organisation that works to address the overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in the justice system, which Keenan started after spending more than half his life behind bars. Gee, it's good to see you again, Keenan. I wish you were in the studio with us tonight, not sitting on the end of a computer there, but thanks so much for making that happen for us. So many people looked at George Floyd and they say, look, it couldn't happen here. But if I was to read out a list of people, Indigenous people who've died recently in custody, you'd know some of those names. They were friends of yours, weren't they?
Correct, they were. And, the most predominant ones are really, really close to me and really hard to talk about. One was very recently, my brother Patrick Fisher fell 13 stories to his death while police were trained to serve an AVO warrant on him in a house where he was under the influence. And the most concerning one was my experience as a teenager. One of my close friends actually got chased by police and got impaled on a fence, and they pulled him off, and that's what kicked off the riots in Redfern. And rest in peace to my brothers. I'll keep your legacy alive and I'll make them remember your name, and hopefully I can do it justice and make a change and an impact here.
Yeah. Is it okay if I say the name of the young man who died in Redfern? Is that acceptable to his family?
I haven't run it by them, but I'm pretty sure that if we have the appropriate conversation around it and treat it respectfully, we can mention his name.
Okay, that was young TJ Hickey, and that did spark off the Redfern riots, which is an example of Indigenous people really reacting to the trauma that goes on with Indigenous deaths in custody. Talk to me, Keenan, about how it is that the experience of police in Indigenous communities can create trauma.
Man, you know, it is a sad case that we are overrepresented, and there has been a Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, and most recently a Royal Commission into another brother that I know personally, Dylan Voller. And you know, since these Royal Commissions, man, we've built more prisons. We haven't built any more alternatives for our people to get education, employment, health. But my personal experience, man, it's very traumatizing watching, you know, police serve warrants and kick in doors to arrest your siblings, your loved ones, having you being criminalized just because you're related to them. You know, patrolling my community. I guess another big topic, you know, is around those two deaths that happened in my community. We were young kids who used to play on them streets, in the same streets I used to play with. Yeah. I lost two very close people to me, and I have to carry that with me. So when everything settles and everybody goes about their lives, these family members have to carry it and push through every day.
Yes. Jason and Jess, there was an article written by Amy Maguire today, journalist Amy Maguire, who said that in Australia we're not outraged in the same way because we're not shocked. And she said, if you do not support black rights here in this country, then you can't support them internationally. You can't proclaim Black Lives Matter.
Reaction? I think we are less shocked because it's less in our faces, because I think the reality is, this is the contradiction, Indigenous Australians here have less power. This is what Wes was saying, have less power, less influence, less visibility than African Americans in America. And I think we're not America. In many ways we are less divided, less unequal, less extreme. But because of that contradiction, and we need to defend those things, but because of those things, and because of the situation of Indigenous Australians, we need to do more. We need to do more in this country, and we need to do better.
Wes, is it a mistake to think that there isn't the same degree of outrage in Indigenous communities? I mean, we know the names of African American men and women, you know, George Floyd, Eric Garner, Ahmaud Arbery, Michael Brown. Indigenous people know the names I'm about to say, names of the dead whose parents and families want us to know their names. Ms. Du, who died in custody in 2014. She was in custody for unpaid fines. Tanya Day, who died 2 weeks after spending hours in police custody where she sustained a traumatic head injury. David Dungay, 12 times said, "I can't breathe," before in jail. Following an altercation with guards, he died in Long Bay Jail. Joyce Clark, who died in hospital from a gunshot wound. Kumanjai Walker. Indigenous Australians know these names. They're not as well known by non-Indigenous Australians. Perhaps we know the names of African Americans better. Why is that?
Well, I think it goes back to social media. I think that that in Australia, you know, a lot of non-Indigenous Australians are just getting on with their lives. They don't understand how fundamental the inequality is and the problems faced by Indigenous communities through community policing, through how many lives are affected. When you've got incarceration at 13 times the rate, the national rate, you know, every Indigenous family is touched by someone, one of their cousins, one of their family that actually goes in and out of prison, or may not come out. It is impossible for an Indigenous person, I think, to not know people that have been inside. But for everyone else, maybe they read about someone who went to prison and it doesn't actually touch their life. And I think one of the other problems, is that for Indigenous Australians, when there is a death, it's an administrative process. You know, what did the coroner say? What did the inquest say?
Yes.
You know, and the police never seem to be quite, in the main, the police aren't held accountable, not in any sort of public sense. And because we we're not used to riots. You know, we kind of expect peaceful protests here in Australia. So my fear is that if there was, you know, like you know, we heard Keenan mention about Redfern, the potential is that Indigenous people lose supporters when there's a riot, if it's in any way violent. You know, it's almost like, well, we all have to keep in this conversation and we have to keep talking to each other. And it gets tiring.
Yeah. Yes, you're tired. Keenan, I know you do so much work in this area. What makes the difference? Final word.
I think what makes a difference is having accomplices and not allies. Because when the shit hit the fan, allies will not be there, but accomplices will stand beside you and walk through the mud with you and pick you up when times get tough. You know, on that note of media too, we need mainstream media to have more, you know, great stories about, you know, obstacles overcome. The only time I ever saw Indigenous people on mainstream media, you know, in custody was if they scored a try on the TV or kicked a goal on AFL, or if they'd done something wrong, or, you know, we're in that fine line. So it's around capturing real stories and letting people understand that the people we have lost in custody, they were away from their family.
Yes.
They were alone.
Yes. Thank you so much, Keenan. I know this is so hard for you, but to bear witness to those people and to tell your truth tonight, we're very grateful for it.